Welcome to the penultimate class on the letters to the congregations in Roman Asia. It's hard to believe this is number 11 and number 12 is next week. So we have made our way around Turkey. For me, it's been a revisiting of these sites, which has been absolutely wonderful. We've now been to 6 of the 7 congregations: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, and then on down to Philadelphia. So to recap those 6 letters, and you should be able to learn some of these. I'm using the same ones every week because I know repetition helps us to remember. So we were there in Ephesus. The message, return to your first love. They had some struggles there. We then went to Smyrna. Remain faithful, you will receive the crown of life. And from there, it was on up to Pergamon, one of the really major cities of that era in the previous couple of centuries. And the message to them, hold fast to the name of Jesus. Fourth letter was Thyatira. They were doing good, they were growing, but they were tolerating a false teacher in every sense of that word. Jesus would take care of her, but didn't put any extra burden on the rest. From there, the fifth letter was to the Christians in Sardis. They needed to wake up and to change. And then in the letter to Philadelphia, where we were last week, we found no criticism. They were small, but Jesus had given them an open door. There were problems with Jews, whom Jesus called a synagogue of Satan. They would learn that the Christians were the ones that Jesus loved. They really were God's people. There was a time of testing coming, but Jesus would be with them. They needed to hold fast through all that they went through. And that leads us tonight to the seventh of the letters. We'll be looking, it's found at the end of Revelation 3. We're going on to what we often call Laodicea, but that's not the way it's even written in Greek. When we were at the site there, Arlene asked one of the guides, how do you pronounce the name of this place? And we were told Laodicea, which is exactly what we find in the Greek text. If you can read the Greek letters, that is Laodicea, to be Dikia, Laodicea, and the K, the C being a hard sound. So I'm going to try to remember to call it Laodicea this evening. Now I've subtitled this particular letter, True Riches Are in Jesus. Ramsey, though, called it the city of compromise, which I think you'll see how that pans out and really is what they are. Travis used, I like this, have everything and nothing. And we're going to see that in the text as well. Our usual outline that we've been following in these classes, we'll look at the history of the place and get a little bit of background, because these letters very much reflect the city that they're written to. We'll have a tour of the archaeological site. As you can see from that photo there is some good archaeology here. And then we will examine the letter itself, the message that Jesus had for them. On our tour last November, we visited Laodicea after spending the night near Hierapolis. So there we are, making our way on our tour in the way that we did it, ending up at Laodicea. And we will have a look at Hierapolis next week, I think, because there's a few other sites that we visited that have a biblical connection that are fascinating and well worth having a look at. I'm sure there's some lessons we can draw from them. This town, Laodicea, was located 40 miles southeast of Philadelphia, around 100 miles east of Ephesus. It's on the river Lycus, on the border of Phrygia. By the time the messenger or messengers from John would have arrived at Laodicea, they would have traveled 250 miles, most likely on foot. So that's quite a bit of territory to travel. And they would have about 100 more miles to go to get back along that bottom road there on our map back to Ephesus. So it really was quite a long journey that they made, although it's very compact there in that area as well. The city itself was founded by Antiochus II, the Greek Seleucid king, sometime around 261 to 246 BC. He named it after his wife, Laodike. There were actually a bunch of cities that he named after her. And so, just like there's a lot of Antiochs, there's a lot of Laodiceas throughout this area of the Roman Empire. It was located on a crossroads. There was a great road coming from the west, which began at Ephesus and Miletus. It came through the city of Laodicea. The road from Pergamum and the Hermus Valley to the north also came through this city. There are also roads into the city from the eastern Caria, and one from central and western Phrygia. And all these major roads met in this city. And this was an important city. Cicero, if you've heard that name of a Greek statesman, Cicero did his banking in Laodicea. Ramsey writes, in such a situation, it only needed peace to become a great commercial and financial center. It was, as Strabo says, only a small city before the Roman time, but after Rome kept peace in the land, it grew rapidly. Cicero brought with him in 51 BC orders to be cashed in Laodicea as the city of banking and exchange. So that gives you a little taste of what's going on historically here in this particular city. There were three cities quite near each other in the Lycus Valley, near the river Meander. Laodicea itself, and just to the south of it, Colossae, and just to the north, Hierapolis. So those three feature largely together, it's also in the biblical text as well. The Lycus Valley had an ascent of 2,600 feet, but the rise was easily ascended because it was a gradual ascent, and the roads just gradually went up higher and higher. Because of that ease of travel, this was the most used road for trade in ancient times. Laodicea was the doorkeeper on this road and the Roman administrative and judicial city of this area. In 2015, a rare marble block was found, which has the inscription of the water law. This was issued in 114. It regulated the use of water imported from the mountains to Laodicea on pain of between 5 and 12,500 denarii for polluting the water or destroying channels or opening up water pipes. You see, the city itself had a serious weakness. It lacked a good water supply and was dependent on an aqueduct, which brought water from springs about 6 miles south of the city. It was a fortress standing on the road, but that itself was its major weakness. This aqueduct was underground. An enemy could have easily conquered the city by cutting off the water supply. Although a Greek city in the land of Phrygia, they did not make any inroads in spreading Greek culture to their area. Phrygia was the least Hellenized part of the province of Asia. The people spoke their native tongue, not Greek, but Phrygian. They were little affected by the Greek ways, Greek culture, Greek manners. Laodicea became a manufacturing center. This photo, by the way, is around 1900. It's ones that William Ramsey included in his book. So it looked like a nice little photo of what they had going archaeologically about 1900. But Laodicea, manufacturing center, they produced a wool which was soft in texture and glossy black in color. It was sought after. It became valuable. It was thought that the glossy softness was achieved through some type of crossbreeding. These garments, this what was made from it was very popular into the 18th century. But by the 19th century, the sheep seemed to have disappeared. The wool was woven into clothing for the local population, also exported. But because of the trade, Laodicea became a very wealthy city. It was leveled by an earthquake in AD 60. And when that happened, they told Rome they didn't need their money. They would rebuild it themselves, which they did to a splendor unknown to most of the empire. That just indicates how wealthy this particular city was. They had several gods they worshipped, as seems to always be the case. There was a temple to the Phrygian god Men, Karo, Karou. That was the original god worshipped in the valley. The temple of this god was like a community center, not only a center for pagan worship, but a center for society, for government, for trade. Everything sort of went on in that particular temple. They had a market, which was said to be under the protection of this god. This market, by the way, continued into the mid 1800s when it was moved to a nearby village. So they had some gods. This, by the way, is a depiction on a coin of this Laodicean god. They also had a famous school of medicine connected to the temple to that god. The names of the leading physicians at the time of Augustus are also mentioned on the Laodicean coins, which had either the serpent encircled staff of Asclepius or the figure of Zeus, which tells us that Zeus, as well as Asclepius, were also worshipped. The Zeus they worshipped was a Hellenized form of the old local god Menkaro. They just sort of blended them together. Men was the king and father of his people. When the area became more Greek, they identified him with Zeus and he became Zeus Laodicean, the Zeus whom the Laodiceans worship. Laodicean god was sometimes as well called Aseis, Aseis, which is a Semitic word, which means powerful. And again, that's his image there on that coin. This, by the way, would indicate there were also settlers from Syria in the early days of the foundation of Laodicea, and they gave some of their own characteristics to this new city. The local god was worshipped in various forms by all in the city. Laodicea, also a center of imperial worship, worshiping the emperors as a god, although this seems to have come a bit later than our letter here in Revelation. They received the temple wardenship under the Emperor Commodus in AD 180 to 191. Mentioned they had a school of medicine. The school of physicians in Laodicea followed the teachings of Herophilus. And this painting here is done in 1906 by Veloso Salgado. Herophilus is there on the right. You see, teaching over the corpse of some unfortunate person. Hippocrates, by the way, is the one seated on the left. That's actually the middle of the picture, but I blew up that part because that's what we needed. But Herophilus was a Greek physician, regarded as one of the earliest anatomists. He lived from 335 to 280. He was the first scientist to systematically perform scientific dissections of human cadavers. He recorded his findings in over 9 different works, all of which are now lost to us. He's often seen as the father of anatomy, but he also believed that compound diseases required compound medicines and began making mixtures of different ingredients in his treatment. The Wikipedia article says this about him. It also says this about him. Herophilus believed that exercise and a healthy diet were an integral were integral to an individual's bodily health. Haven't you heard that somewhere before? He once said that when health is absent, wisdom cannot reveal itself, art cannot become manifest, strength cannot be exerted, wealth is useless, and reason is powerless. Yeah, so keep yourself healthy was the way he believed it should be done. Again, another photo of the Laodicean area from about 1900. But in Laodicea, they developed an ointment for strengthening ears from the spice nard, originally only made in Laodicea. By the second century, other cities also got the formula and were producing it. And there was also an eye medicine that was described as Phrygian. And apparently, they made it into a tablet, and then they grind that tablet and most likely put in some sort of fat or something and apply it to the eyes. Laodicea had the one famous medical center in all of Phrygia. To the Greeks, the term Phrygian really meant Laodicean. They were used interchangeably by the Greeks. Even the most famous orators who lived there were known as Phrygians, not necessarily Laodiceans, but Phrygians. There was a Jewish population. This chap here, as far as I know, is not Jewish, but this is just another one of Ramsey's photographs of the Ephesian gates going into the city. But there was a Jewish population in Laodicea. We know it was quite a large population because in 62 BC, the Roman consul, whose name was Flaccus, refused to let the contributions regularly sent by Asian Jews to go to Jerusalem. He seized the money that had been collected for the temple tax, and it amounted to over 20 pounds of gold. Um, there in Laodicea, 100 pounds of gold, by the way, in nearby Apamea. These large amounts show that there was a large Jewish population at Laodicea, an extremely large one at Apamea. According to one calculation, the gold confiscated in Laodicea would amount to 15,000 silver drachmas. Now, the annual tax was 2 drachmas, so it implies a population of 7,500 Jewish men in Laodicea, not counting women and children. Where did the Jews come from? Well, we know historically that Antiochus III settled more than 2,000 Jewish families from Mesopotamia to this area. That's at the time of after the Jewish exile and when they were moving back. And they are mentioned, by the way, in records from Hierapolis. Very little mentioned about any records we found in Laodicea, but from Hierapolis we do have records of the Jewish population. Josephus recorded that the Jews in Laodicea maintained an important center for financial transactions. We have no information as to whether they were citizens or resident foreigners, but they were active there in this society. The Jews at Hierapolis, we know, were organized into trade guilds. There were purple dyers, carpet makers, possibly others. So it's thought that if Hierapolis had that, and they're very near here, that most likely Laodicea did as well. These were recognized by the city so that they could be included in people's wills. The Jews had the power to prosecute anyone who violated a Jewish tomb and to receive the fines if they were convicted. They had their own public office, the Archives of the Jews, it was called, which kept copies of legal documents executed for or by the Jews. So they were very influential, very active in this particular area. All these various populations of the city would make it a mix of various backgrounds and cultures. There were the Greek, the Macedonian, there were the Syrians, there were the Jews, the native Phrygian, the Carians, the Lydians, plus the Romans. A good mixture of people. The coin here, by the way, it's actually a bronze medal showing Caracala's portrait The emperor being greeted by the city's citizens in the agora during his visit to Laodicea in around 216 AD. So that's why I use that particular illustration there, the mixture of peoples. The city's spirit and nature would be described as having no extremes and nothing that really made an impression. They maintained an even balance that made it a successful trading city, a city of bankers and finance, which could adapt itself to the needs and wishes of others. They were pliable, they were accommodating, they were full of compromise. It's likely that the good news of Jesus came here while Paul was in Ephesus. As we mentioned, Ephesus is about 100 miles from Laodicea, having a marble road that connected the two cities. Can you imagine that? A marble road. And of course, it went through other cities along the route as well. The congregation at Laodicea received a letter from Paul. We know that because it's mentioned at the end of Colossians. When this letter has been read by you, see that it is also read to the Laodicean congregation, that you also read the letter from Laodicea. So he sent them a letter. We don't know what it was, but he sent them a letter. Unlike Philadelphia, there's quite a bit of archaeology here. Since 2002, Pamukkale University in Turkey has continued the archaeological excavations, with much being restored since 2020. So it's a very recent stuff that we got to see. If you see any collection of early photos of this site, you don't see very much. And the stuff that you usually see in those, we did not see at all because there was so much other stuff to see. So let's go into Laodicea. This is entering the site from the Syrian gate. This is the road that led to Ephesus. This would have been a marble road that led to Ephesus. It's in pretty good shape. You can see it's colonnaded, but you see it better if we get just a little bit closer. And you can see how the road was. Walking on it today is not that smooth, but I'm sure it was a lot smoother for the Romans during that time period. You also see lots of bits of archaeology around. I'm not sure who this is supposed to represent. We may have been told, but that was a piece of archaeology just sitting there alongside the road as well. I thought this was an interesting shot here because on the left, those columns you see, really in the center, the columns you see is what they refer to as Temple A. It's a temple to somebody. But notice on the right, that little covered structure, that's where the church building is. So I thought it was interesting, those two just almost across the street from each other. There's a little bit closer view of Temple A. We'll see another view of it in just a second. And then from there, you just turn and see the columns out there. That's where the Agora was. And by the way, you can see that this is quite a large site. Laodicea was in a square, and they've got really quite a bit of it uncovered, quite a bit still to uncover as well. But also, hopefully you see some of the intricateness of some of these bits of archaeology that was on display. I mean, well-worked stuff. Again, here's Temple A, looking at it a bit closer, the steps going up to it where it would have been. And everything I read just refers to it as Temple A, not a temple to Trajan or a temple to men or a temple to anybody else, but just called Temple A. And I think that means we don't know exactly who it was to. The Agora, again, you can see the columns there, place that the trade and everything else would have taken place. And what was interesting walking along this site was there's still lots of archaeology just protruding from the ground. And yes, I left that piece there. It looked awfully big. But yeah, just lots of stuff there as well. The other side of the Agora, again, you can see that there's places to walk or shops or something there on the ground as well. And here's a colonnaded area. And again, you can see what looks to have probably been a fountain or a pool or something in the middle. But again, a place to congregate there. This shows how the excavation's been done, how far they've had to excavate down to get to the roadway. But what does all this stuff to the left of this photo, which we walked over the top of, what does it contain? It might contain a lot more archaeology. So there's still a lot to be done at this site. One of the things that I found intriguing, this was a bit that was under a cover to protect it. And if you can see it there, it's a painted wall with the paint still intact. And of course, a gate going through it as well. Here's a more of a close-up of what that wall looked like. And you can see the paint and the colors, and it would have been a very beautiful thing to have seen in its day, very decorative. Here's another shot a little bit further on down. If you notice at the bottom of this photo, fish painted there, identifiable as fish there in the painting. And this is looking at it going back the other direction. That looks like some snakes or something there on the right-hand side of that, with some sort of image just below them. So you can imagine, if that's just what this one wall looked like, what an impressive city this would have been. They had a theater. In fact, they had two theaters. This is the restored theater. It's Greek. It's built into the side of the hill. It would hold an audience of around 8,000 people. And it was used until the 7th century AD. They just finished restoring it, if I remember correctly, around 2022. So it's a fairly recent restoration. Just down from it, there was protected some mosaic flooring. It's thought that this building that had the mosaic flooring was converted into a church building in the 4th century. If that's so, they had several church buildings in Laodicea at the time. This is another site of a church building, a three-aisled basilica built after the earthquake of 494, but it collapsed in another earthquake just over 100 years later. So it served the Christians there for about 100 years. And here's another theater, not been restored, but hopefully you can see on the hillside there where the seats were, and as it slopes down to where the stage would have been there on the left of this picture would have been the center of the theater. Uh, they had some houses they've uncovered. This seems to be the Bulletarian, the Senate House, which is a very important house in the city. And notice another street here. Again, you can see how much has not been excavated to the left of it. A lot of excavation still to do, but they've made such great progress in the last 25 years, and in particular the last 5 years. There is a major church basilica, a church building. This is called the Church of Laodicea. Notice mosaic floors in it. This is how they said that it would have looked at the time. It was built during the reign of Constantine. So it's built in the early 300s. So a bit different than what we think of as a cathedral today, but this was the building that they built there. It was damaged during that earthquake of 494 AD, but it was restored. It collapsed, though, in the earthquake just over 100 years later, that second earthquake. But within it, we did see a baptistry, a pool for immersing people, and it said the person who was being immersed would enter one side and exit the opposite side. Again, that dates from the 300s. So they're still immersing at that point in history. This is looking down more of the church floor, and this is one of the side aisles. Again, you can see lots of mosaic floors. That would have been something else to have seen at the time. And this is looking down the central aisle of the church building itself, the basilica itself. So it was a three-aisled basilica with, if I remember correctly, the baptistry, the immersion pool, is to our left of this photograph here. And one last look at the street in Laodicea as we left the site. Now, we did see in the distance some of the earlier archaeology, which is just outside this area. So here's some photos of it, not taken by me, but from our collection of photos. And that's about all there was until the recent excavations. This is a Roman bridge over the Asopos River near the site. These, by the way, are from Wikimedia Commons. You can find them there. This is the West Baths Complex. Again, you can see to the right some of the other of the site that we visited just a bit there. And they have a Roman stadium. And if you look closely, you can see how that would definitely be where they would have raced their chariots and whatnot, with bleachers there on the right. You can see that the right background there just a bit. And then finally, the baths of the gymnasium. So that's the archaeology we have for Laodicea. Quite a bit. And hopefully there'll be even more in years to come. Let's get into the text. Write to the messenger of the congregation in Laodicea, the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the originator of God's creation, says these things. This letter has a few differences to the other six that we've looked at. One of the differences is fewer allusions to Jewish scriptures, although it begins with one of the most Hebraic passages found in the Revelation, describing Jesus. He's identified here as the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the first cause of God's creation. This is the only one of the descriptions that does not go back to John's vision of Jesus in chapter 1. These are taken from elsewhere. The Amen, that word Amen, it's true, it's truth. So really, this is saying this is the truth. This is the final say. And it also carries the connotation of being firm and steadfast. We can rely on this. Robertson, in his word picture, says in Isaiah 65:16, we have the God of Amen, understood in the Septuagint as the God of truth. Here, it's, of course, in the Revelation, it's applied to Christ. Isaiah 65:16 in the Net Bible says, whoever pronounces a blessing on the earth will do so in the name of the faithful God, or the God of truth. Whoever makes an oath in the earth will do so in the name of the faithful God, the God of truth. For past problems will be forgotten. I will no longer think about them. Stephen Travis says, it means that he is utterly reliable. He has all the firmness which, as we shall see, this church lacks. Christ has burned his witness in a way which perfectly, the burn's the wrong word I typed there. So anyway, he describes his witness in a way which perfectly portrays the truth about God's character and purpose. Of course, you remember what Jesus said of himself that John recorded. I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's who Jesus is. So he is the Amen. He's the faithful and true witness. In Greek, could be translated the faithful witness, the genuine. We can depend on what he says. We've already seen the phrase faithful witness back in chapter 1, verse 5. But this is a descriptive phrase which occurs several times in this book, faithful and true witness. Gene West wrote about this. He said, he's the one who faithfully and truthfully delivers through his testimony the will of God to man. And then finally we have, he is the, as McCord translates it, the originator of God's creation. Some translations, the first cause of God's creation. The Greek word here can go, that's translated originator or first cause arche, could go several directions. In the Septuagint, it's often translated as ruler, authority. But the idea at the beginning, he's the one who began the creation. McCord indicates this in the originator of God's creation, and seems to be the direction the NIV goes as well, the ruler of God's creation. The Jerusalem Bible, the ultimate source of God's creation. I think some translations have also put he's the first created, which is linguistically possible, but not good Bible, because Jesus was not a created being. And that Bible said, from a linguistic standpoint, all three meanings for arche are possible. The most compelling connection is to be found in the prologue to John's Gospel, where the Logos is said to be in the beginning with God, a temporal reference connected with creation. And then verse 3 states that all things were made through him. The connection with the original creation suggests the meaning originator for arche here. Um, Other references give the meaning as the first cause, a term that is too philosophical for the general reader. So the Net Bible used originator as well. Then he gets into the meat of it, and he doesn't banter any words about. I know your works. You're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were cold or hot. So because you're lukewarm, neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Again, we have that phrase that's found in every one of the letters. He knew their works, and for them, this was not a good thing. There is nothing to commend them that they were doing. They were spiritually lukewarm. They were neither for Jesus nor against him, or so they thought. Again, remember the character of the city, and they too well reflected that character in which they lived. Ramsey writes, in the special duties imposed on it as the end and aim of its foundation, to guard a road and a gateway, to be a missionary of Greek language and culture in the Phrygian land, it proved unsuccessful. Talking there, of course, about the city. The one respect in which it stands for preeminent is that it is the adaptable city, able to suit itself to the needs of others because it has no strongly pronounced character of its own. We might say they're very wishy-washy. They're just not, they don't stand up for things. Now, to a person of the world, what they saw was a city well suited to commerce and trade. But Jesus didn't see the city nor the Christians who reflected the character of their city this way at all. Jesus wished the Christians would take a stand, one way or another. Maybe there's a lesson in that for us. In reality, if we're not for Jesus, then we're against him. Because they wouldn't take a stand, Jesus said he would vomit them out of his mouth. Net Bible translates it, I am going to vomit you out of my mouth! Exclamation point. There are some things which we may eat and enjoy, sometimes hot, sometimes cold. But lukewarm, they're pretty revolting. Gene West wrote that the word lukewarm in Greek is kliaros, and it really means tepid. It carries with it the idea of being stagnant. Now, keep in mind that unlike their neighboring cities, they had no water supply. They had to bring it in an aqueduct, which meant by the time the water arrived in the city, it was neither hot nor cold. And maybe the idea of stagnant goes well with it as well. The word for vomit that is used here in this letter, Robertson says it means to reject with extreme disgust. That's Jesus' reaction to this particular group of Christians. Chap named Rudwick, that Rubel Shelley quoted, said another possibility for interpretation of lukewarm, for all its wealth, the city could produce neither the healing power of hot water, like its neighbor Hierapolis, nor the refreshing power of cold water to be found at Colossae, but merely lukewarm water, useful only as an emetic, something to cause vomiting. The church was charged with a similar uselessness. And when you're standing there in Laodicea, you can turn and you can look and you can see Hierapolis. You see the white there in that photograph towards the center. It's 6 miles away, but that's the white calcium carbonate deposits because of the hot springs in Hierapolis. And Hierapolis is known for its hot water springs. They're still there today. But if you turn to our right, as I did, and take a photograph, you see the mountains, you see the foothills of the mountains. That's where Colossae was, 10 miles to the east. Colossae, known for its cold, refreshing water. And then you have Laodicea. Their water wasn't worth drinking. Stephen Travis says, by labeling them lukewarm, he's not, as is often supposed, complaining about their lack of enthusiasm or suggesting that hot enthusiasm and cold resistance to him are both preferable to half heartedness. He is condemning your deeds. Just as the city, in contrast to its neighbors, has no water which can supply life and health, so the church is behaving in a way which serves no useful purpose. The effect of their conduct on Christ is like the effect of the city's water supply. It makes him sick. And I think that's a good summation of what Jesus is writing to them about. He goes on to say, you say, I'm rich. I've become wealthy. I need nothing. But you do not know that you're wretched and pitiable and poor and blind and naked. I advise you to buy gold from me, purified in fire, that you may be rich, and white garments, that you may be clothed, and that the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to rub on your eyes, that you may see. See, the problem was their wealth. They thought they were self sufficient. They thought they had need of nothing. I don't know how many people I've talked to over the years that when you talk to them about Jesus, I don't need him. I'm doing really well by myself. Thank you very much. And then within a few years, their lives fall apart. The Laodiceans are self satisfied. Jesus identified the problem of wealth, of course, when he was teaching. Remember what he said: no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. As my brother put it in his little work on Revelation, the problem was that they had everything but Christ. And that's the problem, isn't it? They didn't have Jesus. They had blinded themselves to the way they really were. Rather than being wealthy in Jesus' sight, they were impoverished. They were wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. They lacked enough spiritual clothing to keep them decent. They were dying spiritually, despite what they thought about themselves. G. West says there are few things sadder than to be dying and not know it. It's a good, true statement. And William Ramsey says there's only one way open to it. It must cease to trust itself. It must recognize that it's poor and seek riches where the true riches can be found. Its banks and its wealthy money changers can give it only false money, but the author can sell it gold refined by fire. He does not give this gold for nothing. It must be bought with a price, the price of suffering and truth, fidelity, and martyrdom. So Jesus advises them to buy real gold from him, not earthly gold, which would not last, but that which has been refined by fire, which would produce pure gold. The only way they could be spiritually refined by fire was enduring suffering, taking a stand. The word for buy comes from the Greek word agorasai, which means to redeem, to pay, buy back, to acquire by paying a ransom price. They needed to buy back from the Lord what they had lost, and then they would become truly rich. Of course, wealth in that culture was also defined by clothing. In particular, purple, as this was rare and expensive. They also had those nice, soft, shiny black woolen garments from the sheep that used to be there. Well, Jesus advised them to purchase from him white clothes. We've seen white clothes in other letters as well. He says that would truly cover up their shameful nakedness. White, of course, also has the idea of purity there. Ramsey says the church must recognize that it's naked and seek to be clad. And its manufacturers cannot help it with their fine, glossy black and violet garments, which they sell and export to the whole world. Only white garments, such as the faithful in Sardis wear, will be of any use to cover their shame. And those are sold only by the author. They too must be bought with a price. Gene West said, "There's no indication that in this letter these people were especially wicked. There's no doctrine of Balaam, Jezebel, or the Nicolaitans. There's no indication they were eating things offered to idols or committing any kinds of sexual immorality. Yet they were not a righteous people. They were not walking in robes of white. The Lord indicated their need to be found clothed in purity and righteousness, so their indifference to things divine would not be evident to all. They also needed to purchase from him eye salve, so they would no longer be blind. But they first needed to recognize that they were blind. Although that fact that he tells them they need to purchase it seems to show there's still some hope for them. Now, Bible study notes said this, and we mentioned this. The city of Laodicea had a famous medical school and exported a powder called Phrygian powder that was widely used as an eye salve. It was applied to the eyes in the form of a paste, the consistency of dough. The Greek term from the salve here, coloperion, is Latin colarium, is a diminutive form of the word for a long roll of bread. So it looks like they made something a consistency of dough to put on their eyes. But what's Jesus saying? The local eye salve would be of no use. They needed that which Jesus could give to heal their spiritual blindness. Gene West says this was a call to the saints of Laodicea to repent and readjust their sight so they could see their spiritual condition. They needed to see clearly and accurately if they're going to realize the condition into which they had fallen. So he goes on to say, I correct and chasten as many as I love. Be zealous and change your heart. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him, I will dine with him, and he with me. See, Jesus is telling them all of this because he loved them. If he didn't love them, he would not be rebuking or disciplining them. If only people would learn this, especially in dealing with their children. The Greek word here for love is phileo, affection. But they needed to be zealous and change their heart. They needed to change their lives, putting Jesus back in the center. He was standing at the door and knocking, but they weren't opening. The reason he was not with them was not because he was unloving and didn't care, but because they wouldn't let him in. There's a famous picture of this by Holman Hunt of a Jesus image knocking at a door. And what I always find intriguing about this, and he did several versions of it, is that there's no handle on the outside of the door. Jesus can't and won't force his way in. We have to open up to him. That Bible study note says the expression in Greek does not mean entrance into the person, as is popularly taken, but entrance into a room or building toward the person. Some interpreters understand the door here to be the door to the Laodicean church, and thus a collective or corporate image rather than an individual one. And that very well could be. Gene West says in ancient times, dining suggested close and intimate friendship. Jesus said, in effect, open to me, and we will be the closest of friends again. The Laodiceans had to open the door, since they were the ones who had slammed it in the Lord's face with their worldly pride and spiritual indifference. You know, if Philadelphia was the congregation with the open door, Laodicea was the congregation with the closed door. And he finishes, no, but before he finishes, he does say, if anyone hears his voice, would open the door, he will come in. He won't force his way in. We've got to invite him. And keep the context here. He's not writing this to those who are not Christians. He's writing this to Christians. But if invited, he will grant us full fellowship with him. And then the final bit here. The one who overcomes will sit with me on my throne as I overcome and sat with my Father on his throne. Let him who has an ear hear what the Spirit says to the congregations. Those with ears need to pay attention. This was important. The one who overcomes would sit with him on his throne, just as he overcame death and sat down with the Father. This is definitely saying that such a person would be in eternity with Jesus. It seems to be saying that they will participate in his reign, participate with him in the victory, which results in living faithful lives. Gene West says the Christian who succeeds in maintaining his fellowship with Christ is spiritually sitting with Christ on his throne and will continue to do so forever, and refers us to Ephesians 1 there. This is what we can have now by maintaining our fellowship with Jesus. This was something that needed to be heard and it needed to be heeded. Ramsey concludes this part by saying the Laodicean church is the only one which is absolutely and wholly condemned. Not even a faithful remnant is left, such as even in Sardis, the dead church kept itself pure and white. No exception is allowed in Laodicea. Advice is given, but there's no appearance that it will be taken. The weakness of the city will become apparent in the testing that was coming. We're only about 3 minutes off of 9 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and give my lessons first this time, things that I saw that we could learn. Of course, Jesus knows all that we're going through. We know that. And we need to learn to see ourselves. I see the word see there. See ourselves as we really are, as Jesus sees us. Stephen Travis writes, the whole problem with a church like Laodicea is that it is blissfully unaware of its own tragic condition. On the surface, it may look impressive, whilst underneath it has no deep roots into Christ. And that can be a problem for us today. We need to see ourselves as we really are, as Jesus sees us, not as others might see us. We need to be aware as well on our dependence on wealth. Again, Stephen Travis writes, increasing prosperity has a numbing effect on Christians as on anyone else. We come to take it for granted that our standard of living will continue to rise. We adjust our expenditure to take account of our pay increases. Even though we do not quite keep up with the Joneses, we prefer not to be far behind them. The whole clutter of materialism so easily blunts our spiritual awareness. Gradually and unnoticed, the thought steals upon us that our everyday lives can continue without much attention to God. And the final ones I had were these. They're really in the form of questions. Are we more concerned to be acceptable to those around us than to live by the uncomfortable demands of Jesus? Because that's really what the Laodiceans were doing. Are we showing a quality of life which reminds people of Jesus, his compassion, his lack of self-concern, his ability to let people know they are valued, his single-minded commitment to God's will? Are we showing that to people? And finally, have we invited Jesus into our lives? Have we opened the door to him? Stephen posted a couple lessons. Thank you for that. Do not compromise the gospel and our identity as true followers of Jesus. That is one thing we definitely need to learn from this letter. And also wake up, recognize who Christ truly is: sovereign, trustworthy, and foundational. I'm going to open up in just a minute. Let me go through some adverts first, because we are at the 9 o'clock hour. Next week, I'm planning to look at, I'm just calling it lessons from other Roman cities. Some of the other cities we visited that have a biblical connection and what lessons we can learn from there. Of course, don't forget Mark's class on Monday. as well as this class next week. These are our last classes in this series. And then the week after, starting September 22nd, a new series of classes, a new round of classes. Mondays, John Griffiths, who's with us, will be teaching Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah, which are deep, thrilling books. And on Thursdays, Patrick's going to take over here and be looking at following the master.